Well, I am thrilled to introduce my audience to you, a new friend that I met through doing this podcast. We've had a couple of conversations, but this is Jennifer Ji-Hye Cope. And she reached out to me. Actually, Jennifer reached out to me initially and said, let's have a conversation about something that people aren't talking about enough. And it is the idea of disability in the church. And sometimes we have these conversations and we talk about people that are, instead of talking with people who are primarily impacted by this. So Jennifer, I am thrilled to have you here and this is going to be fun. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
The first thing I had asked was, Jennifer, why is the idea of accessibility and combating ableism in our faith communities important to you specifically?
Yes, well, so I have multiple disabilities. For listeners who don't know me, I am autistic, I have ADHD, I have multiple infections, I'm a wheelchair user. I am currently training my own service dog to help with sensory meltdowns and things like that. And I existed in the church for 15 years, trying to keep up with the non-disabled norm, not realizing that I was being hurt doing that. And it wasn't until one Sunday I saw 3 separate couples come into the church who were each wheelchair users. And each one, I watched them come in and immediately I'm crying. And it was then that I realized, oh, I've been the only one for so long. And then I watched them and each one had their own struggles, hurdles. Yeah. And if you're not a wheelchair user, you might not have recognized that. But I intimately knew what this particular person ran to the wheelchair user to say. I know the words because that woman would find me every Sunday and say very insensitive and offensive things to me. And it was then that it became important because I realized, okay, this isn't just about me. And observing it from the outside, I could see that you just feel the pain, you know?
Yeah.
And it's outside of myself. And the more I started to speak up, the more I was dismissed, the more I wasn't listened to. And it's not just like I'm a random church goer. I've been a pillar in that church for 15 years. I was friends with the pastors. One of them gave me away at my wedding. They saw me as someone who was respectable and discerning and wise, and I taught seminars. So there really was no reason for them to not listen to me. And so it occurred to me that not only do people just not understand, but they're also not set up in a position to actually listen to disabled people when we say we're being hurt, or we say like we need this or we need that. And so the more I paid attention, the more I started listening to disabled people outside of the church. And reading the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Restoration Act, I realized that I've been spiritually abused collectively by the church. I had been psychologically abused. And a lot of that was just due to ignorance. And then, of course, there's some pride in there. And yeah, I'll stop there.
No, I think it's really helpful. What stands out to me when you say that is how you had put up with a lot until you saw it impacting someone else. Isn't that interesting?
Right.
That you felt more like, okay, I can say so. I should say something now. And you could have for yourself, but for some reason did you just not want to be a squeaky wheel, as they say? You know, you wanted to be low maintenance.
As a woman,
yeah,
and as a disabled woman, I was socialized to believe that my needs didn't matter. And that was reinforced as I would tell the pastors, hey, like you need a sermon to educate people how to like talk to people with disabilities. Like, oh, we don't really have space for that. That's telling me that what I'm dealing with is not important. And growing up undiagnosed autistic, I was constantly told, you're not enough, you're worthless. Many disabled people, especially those of us who have been disabled our entire lives, are repeatedly told by society, the church as well, that we don't matter and that any needs that we have that someone else accommodates, that's them doing us a favor. That's not society working as Christ as God built the body to function.
Yeah.
And so there's terms like special needs, which puts the emphasis on our needs versus the failure of society. And
Mm-hmm.
so if anybody accommodates our needs, they're going above and beyond to do
Mm.
something for us. So it's like the self-martyrdom, the saviorism. And if you are not brought up in a family with a person who understands this disability experience, you're going to be taught
Yeah.
that way. And so much of that is just being a childhood abuse survivor, being a bullying survivor, being brought up autistic and nobody considering that that was even a possibility, that I was just lazy or whatever. It's definitely socialized into us
Yeah.
and beat into us, that whatever we get, whatever scraps of our inheritance we get is more than we deserve.
And you should be grateful. Is that the
I should be
message, that like
grateful.
you should be grateful for anything at all?
Yeah.
And man, if people don't have that personal experience of having so many barriers to being able to be next to other people in worship, unfortunately, it takes having somebody you care about say something, because you can be best friends or sisters of, or a brother of somebody, and use that as an excuse, because maybe that person that is close friends of yours that is dealing with a disability has never told you.
Yes.
Maybe it's not that it's so easy for them and that everything's great, but that they don't know if you would be open to hearing from somebody. What is a good starting point for a conversation with somebody? If people that are listening that say, we want our churches to be less terrible. We want our churches to be places. Bob Sweetana said that about faith communities. Like, maybe we need to be less awful. Maybe the point
Yeah.
is we want to be less awful. And we're starting to see that there are things that are systemic things that have been wrong in our churches, and we just never even thought about accessibility, ableism happening. Where is a good starting point for that conversation? How to do this in a way that is not going to be harmful to the person that you really want to help. You don't want to organize.
Whenever I would come into a church service on a Sunday morning, it was always about my health. It was always about healing my disability, which just told me that uh, I wasn't capable enough. I wasn't competent enough to figure out how to heal myself. Um, and even though I was in a congregation where they were not teaching the proper prosperity gospel, but there was an undercover prosperity gospel. Um, so you see a person with a disability, and the first thing you notice might be their disability. And we don't want to look past that,
Yeah.
because disability touches our identity. For me, my disabilities touch every aspect of my identity. So you don't want to look past it, you want to look through it and see the human being that is there.
Yeah.
So as far as interacting with disabled people, they are meant to treat them like an image bearer as you would anybody else.
Yes.
We make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not that scary. And so I am an unreliable speaker. Means sometimes I can speak, sometimes I am extremely verbal, and sometimes I'm unable to speak.
Yeah.
And so I have a little experience in that department as far as people who are non-speaking. It may be scary to interact with someone like that, but really just sit with them.
Yeah.
Just talk to them, touch their hand. They've probably never been touched on
Mhm.
a Sunday morning because people are so scared. Just being with people and listening or sharing about your life. Don't try to like put your ideas about our life on
Yeah.
us. We have our own ideas about our own life.
Yeah.
And then as far as churches just need to be equipped with the theology of disability.
Yeah.
We need to have a theology of disability so that we know what God says about disability, what scripture says about disability, and then how that's going to translate to our practical theology, how we're going to treat people with disability. And then I'd say the third thing is look up Amendment 504 of the Restoration Act, look up the Americans with Disabilities Act, and get compliant, because there is a church leaders lobbied against disability laws. I'm going to
Yeah.
say that again. Church leaders in the 70s, 80s, and 90s
Yeah.
lobbied against the Americans with Disabilities Act because they didn't want to comply. And so there is a religious exemption.
Yeah.
So churches do not have to be accessible. But if we're looking at God's law, we ought to be more than the ADA.
Yeah. Yeah.
If the secular world is out loving disabled people than the church, there's a problem. And
Yeah.
I call it the generational sin of partiality. We don't know that we are sinning in this way because it's been handed down from a few generations. And so
Yeah.
pastors are ordained into this legacy of oppression of disabled people and are completely unaware of it. So treat people with disabilities like people,
Yeah.
get a theology of disability,
Yeah.
and get compliant with the laws and holding God's law above man's law.
You saying that about the ADA, I remember having our church had a building program in the 80s. And I specifically remember them being so grateful that either whatever year it was they were building, that they were not going to be required to have an elevator. And there was a ramp but if you want to go downstairs, you have to take the ramp outside and around to the downstairs fellowship hall where the fellowship happens. Oh my goodness.
And those ramps are usually where the trash bins are, because typically they only build ramps for the custodians to get the trash out.
That's
So
interesting.
that communicates to us something else.
Mhm. Or they don't keep them free. Yeah. Besides that, right? Like other
Oh,
people
yes.
put things there. They don't think about it. They think that it is going to be an exception to
Mhm.
use that, which is really, really sad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and the message that says, well, there's not that many people. Is this the opposite of what we hear from Jesus when he talks about the shepherd that goes after the one? That one that can't make it is precious, and all the others are safely in. All the others are comfortable. He doesn't wait for them to figure out a way to build their own ramp. He did not tell the sheep, well, you should be thankful that you are within a couple feet of me. He went and physically went and gently grabbed that sheep and said, I'm bringing you with me
Yeah.
right into the middle.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. hmm And that's where we should be. And what's hilarious, not haha funny and funny,
yeah.
is that we say, and that's a common thing people say, oh, we don't have disabled people here. Or more extreme, we
Why?
don't want disabled people here.
Yeah.
But the ones who say we don't have disabled people here, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
There's this cycle of there's no accessibility, so disabled people don't come. You don't see people with disabilities, so you don't think that there's a need for accessibility.
Mhm.
And so disabled people aren't in your church and you don't see them. And it's just this circle that you don't realize. It's not that we're not coming, it's that we can't.
Mhm.
Or we
And
realize
Elsa,
that
is it true? Would you say there are some people that came and they have accessibility needs and they are afraid to say anything because
yeah,
their disability isn't something you can see?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Invisible disabilities are real. I've been in that category before. And that's hard in its own way because you don't want to come off looking like you're lazy or whatever. And it's harder. In fact, when I was a part of my former church, I was the only visibly disabled adult in the congregation for a long time. And I would have people who had chronic conditions, invisible disabilities, who would come and talk to me because they saw me and they knew that I would understand. And either they were too afraid to go talk to the pastors or the staff, or they had already and had been dismissed, and not in like a, oh, we don't care, but they'd say something flippant. Like they really didn't get
Yeah.
where the person was coming from. So yeah, that's absolutely the disability demographic is the most diverse minority group. If you
Yeah.
can think about all the different ways the body can
Yeah.
have issues, or be different, or just be
Yeah.
different. It's
Yeah.
intense.
Yeah. The second question I'd written down was like, what voices and bodies are we missing by centering our church ministries and services around a very specific type of body and a specific way of processing and interacting with the world? What are we missing?
so much,
Yes.
so much. Like I couldn't even, so if we just go by the statistics, okay,
Yeah.
1 in every 6 people has a disability. And then 15 to 20% of the world's population is neurodiverse, meaning dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, ADD, autism. And keeping in mind that many people, especially women and people of color, don't get these neurodiverse diagnoses because the studies are very biased. So you have all these people, like a huge percentage of the world's population that can't come to church.
Yeah.
There's so much you're missing. There's so much you're missing and truly missing out on. And I'm gonna, you can indulge my Bible nerdiness for a moment.
Yes, I love the Bible nerdiness.
Okay, good. I've been triggered by scripture for a long time. So if
Bring it
anybody's
on.
listening, I'm going to do my best. So 1 Corinthians 12, verses 22 through 24. So Paul is talking about the body. He's talking about the body, the bride of Christ, and he's talking about how God has designed the body to work together. The eye can't say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the foot, I don't need you. And he says, on the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And those parts of the body that we think less honorable, we bestow the greater honor. And our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty, which the more presentable parts do not require. But God so composed the body, giving greater honor to the parts that lack it, so that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. Now, check this out, where it says the parts of the body that seem to be weaker, the parts of the body that we think less honorable, that word doke in the Hebrew is often left out. I think it's left out in CSB, but it's imperative. The word means like reputed as, considered as, thought of as. It's not saying the parts of the body that are weaker, are less honorable, but that we as a society, the society he was speaking to, but definitely translates to today as well, we consider these parts of the body weak and less honorable. And so there's an infantilization of these people and they get pushed out. And what is so cool about this passage is Paul's talking about the body, and he mentions the hand, the eye, the foot, the head, parts of the body we can see. In this passage, when he talks about the parts of the body that are considered weak, considered less honorable, that are seem to us to be unpresentable, he's talking about organs. He's making the comparison to our vital organs, the heart, the lungs, the kidneys. So if we think of our heart is a muscle, a strong muscle that pumps blood and oxygen throughout the body. Now you take it out of its proper place, it's weak. It could be destroyed like that. But in its proper place at the center of the body, and you said this, got me all excited, its proper place at the center of the body, surrounded by muscles and bone and layers of skin, it is in a context where it can do its job efficiently. And he is making that comparison to the people groups that are considered less honorable. And that can be any people group, unhomed people, people of color in certain demographics. But almost always there's there's sometimes an exception to this rule, but it's not often, but I feel pretty confident in saying almost always this will include disabled people. And so what he's saying, when we are missing wheelchair users, when we are missing people who are blind, when we are missing the autistic demographic, we're missing a heart. We're missing a lung. And I mean, we can do with one lung, not well. We can do with one kidney, but if the other kidney goes out, what are you going to do? So what we're missing vital organs.
And this is what gets me like all fired up, Jennifer, is when you read that, here's what I hear you saying and the word saying. It's like, sure, people that seem weaker and have disabilities, sure, they might need you. But guess what? You need them. And quite possibly your body of believers need them more than you realize. I'm getting chills.
I'm chilled all over the place. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much pride tearing the church apart today.
Mhm.
And what I see is Yeshua cleansing his bride. And if Christians wake up, we're going to read a verse like this and be like, oh, that's part of the problem.
Yeah,
Is we
yeah.
have these people in place that are all showy, great communicators and prideful. If you have the 1%, right? Not to like single out a demographic, but if you have white, non-disabled male pastors
Mhm.
solely leading the church, you're talking about a demographic that's at the very top of the human food chain.
Yeah.
Then I just want to ask this question to your listeners: is your in your church, if you're a churchgoer or in your previous church, was the pulpit wheelchair accessible?
Mhm.
Did you have an ASL interpreter? It's not that disabled people can't be leaders, it's that the church makes it nearly impossible for us to be leaders.
Mhm.
And what the church needs, if we're looking at scripture, the last shall be first, the first shall be last. Our body ought to be led, have leaders in it who are considered weak, thought of as less honorable.
Yeah.
Because if Christ himself said, and this is a bit of a metaphor too, but I didn't come for the healthy, I came for the sick.
Mhm.
So why are the healthy leading the churches? And not that they can't be
Right.
a part of it, but if that's solely what's happening, there's a
Yeah, there's a
problem.
richness we're missing
Yeah.
when all of the all of the leadership looks the same. Um, it's not just about providing opportunity for people, it's about the experience, the community for the entire body.
Yes.
We all need each other.
Yes.
And that is could be a beautiful picture, and it's also really challenging. It's a really good challenge to those of us that have never had to think about it. I had mentioned in my email to you with some of these questions was just about like how the pandemic, when it started, for some people, this was the first time they really thought about, are our buildings healthy for people? Because the world required it for a certain moment. Everything stopped for a moment, and we thought, oh, what are we doing to make it harder for people? And there were some things that were done to address accessibility, and there were things that were just seen for the first time that many people have had to just see and deal with for so very long. So I would love to hear from you. What good did you see come out of us dealing with a pandemic? What things do you think we still need to be leaning into?
Yeah. Yeah. The start of the pandemic was extremely difficult for me, but it was difficult for a specific reason. Suddenly, the entire world needed something that disabled people have been needing for centuries and not getting. And within a week, there was live stream services. Within a week,
Yeah.
Zoom conversations. When the entire world needed it, it happened really fast.
Yeah.
So it was really difficult to see that. It was like, on one hand, yes, it's wonderful. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, so if I need it, well, you're not going to do it. But if non disabled people need it, if important people need
Mhm.
it, it's going to happen real quick. So I'm still dealing with a lot of hurt.
I think we need to hear that, Jennifer. That is so valid. And the easy slide into fatigue from it all. When you can
Yes.
physically opt out of it, and people were like, well, I'm done with that now. And, Jennifer, you're like, I don't get to opt out of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. And so all that's in the past year. I mean, even before that, it's just been slowly going away. And there are two conferences that I wanted to attend. And I asked, hey, do you have like a streaming option for someone like me, someone who might be homebound or someone who's a wheelchair user for whom it's dangerous to fly
Mhm.
because there's something like tens of thousands of wheelchairs a month get destroyed by
Oh,
airlines
yeah.
and they are not obligated to take any responsibility for it. So it's dangerous there. People have died because they can't take their wheelchair into the plane and then they destroy the wheelchair, and they're sitting in these really hard transport wheelchairs that the airlines have. And if you have a spine issue, like a very prominent disability activist died was the year before last because of that. So it's dangerous for us to fly even. So
Yeah.
and you know, conferences, they're not offering live stream anymore because, well, I mean, the pandemic's over.
I know,
Um,
talking about it like it's over too. You're like, well,
yeah, it's over for some people, not for me though. So the Zooming was great. I think I attended before we officially left our church. I attended more community group Bible studies in like in 2020 than I had the previous 2 years,
wow.
which was zero the previous 2 years because it was just wasn't safe for me to go at that point.
Mm.
Um, and oh gosh, so the whole world got accessible real fast. Like there's curbside service, a lot more places were doing delivery. So there was a lot of good that happened and really showed the world like we can do this if we want to.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's all going away, it's not a surprise. And it's encouraging for me to hear you saying that these are things you thought of. By and large, disabled people, we were hoping that the pandemic would help the world kind of see the world that we live in. And what we saw mostly was people complaining about how hard
Mm.
it is, but not making the connection that like, hey, like we can help you. Like I'm a veteran at
Yeah.
staying at home.
Yeah.
I know how to do that. Let me help you. Like,
Yeah.
but again, infantilization of disabled people were not listened to. And yeah, it was really the benefits did not outweigh the harm because we also had people like in Tennessee holding signs saying sacrifice the weak because you want to get a haircut. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
complex feelings
Yeah.
with the
The
pandemic.
words, there are a lot of words that can never be unheard
Yeah.
or unread that happened during after everybody got tired. Like there was like this magical moment in beginning of March or the middle of March where everybody was sort of together. And then within a couple of weeks, that magical moment was over. And man, I really wish and I hope that believers especially think through the things that they typed on social media and said without thinking, because impact is important, even if you didn't intend for it to harm somebody.
Yeah.
You can harm somebody without intending it, and it doesn't take the harm away by saying, I meant well. Your meaning well, it is irrelevant to the fact
Mhm.
that the words that we said, the words that, and I have to say we, because I'm a part of the faith communities that said, well, you know what? It's just these people that are impacted. It's only these ones. Very few people will be impacted if we don't do XYZ. And I thought, this sounds like all of evolution survival of the fittest, that so many people have rejected all along. And now it's become like a rallying cry of the white evangelical church. It was horrifying and is horrifying. And I'm hearing this with a body that was supposed to be just fine in it, like it's going to be just fine. And I can't even imagine, like those things were being said long before that, probably. I never heard it. I didn't pay attention to it. Yeah.
Um, I'm a white woman. I understand what privilege bias feels like and how
Yeah.
grievous it is once you figure it out. I have a tremendous amount of empathy for that. It's the people who can that doesn't affect that gets me angry.
Yeah. I've been trying to talk to my kids about that. Like, yes, I'm proud of you when you work hard. Yes, I'm so grateful. But I want you to know we got real lucky. We have become,
Yeah,
and you know what? I'm not afraid to use the word lucky.
right.
I don't think I'm more blessed. I think the fact that the person who decided how they were going to build buildings a long time ago, the standard size of a person, the standard needs, was thinking about my body. I got real lucky. It wasn't because I did the right thing. And I see people not being like you, wanting to be the model church member, right? Like if I am the model church member, maybe I can make one ask. People like me don't have to be the model church member to make an ask, to make a whole bunch of asks, although I don't
Yeah.
make very many asks. What are your thoughts on that?
The thing that stands out to me is the word lucky. I heard a sermon on disability. It was a great sermon. But he said something about um, better, that
Mm,
you know, maybe you were sick, but you're better now, and life is easier now, and it's better. And there's this assumption that life is better when you're not disabled.
mhm.
And again, in earthly standards, the way that our earth and our society is set up, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. It it tricks us into thinking, oh, non-disabled life is better than
yeah,
disabled life. But if again we're looking at God's upside down kingdom, easier, yes. Better, absolutely not.
yeah.
I would not trade the fellowship I have had with Yeshua for any able-bodiedness.
Mhm.
And I do not say that lightly. I have chronic acute pain. I've been on the floor begging to die because I've been in
Mm,
so much pain. I have a bacterial and brain infection that causes psychosis, meaning I lose agency, and that is life threatening.
mm.
Um, I have been in an incredible amount of pain and a credible amount of grief. And yet, God is with me in it. And I am fellowshipping with Christ in his suffering.
Mm.
And I am being prepared, putting my treasures in heaven so that when I see Christ, I'm going to know him so much better. He's going to be so, how do I explain this? He's going to be so much more familiar having gone through what I've gone through
Yeah,
because of all of that fellowship with him. And I'm not saying that it's a given,
yeah,
right? It's a choice you make. It's a chronic choice that you make.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
What you're saying sounds so familiar, resonates with what Lindsay Medford was saying. She wrote the book, My Body and Other Crumbling Empires, and how she realized that our capitalistic system demands a certain body,
Yeah.
but her body being unable to participate in that, she also saw that as an, something she didn't ask for, but an unexpected gift in the end. Like, my body's telling me something good, and I'm listening because I have to listen. So many people are not listening to their bodies because they're coping. Maybe it wasn't that frantic pace that was so good.
Right.
Maybe that isn't better. Maybe that was
Mhm.
never meant to be better. But the person that
Mhm.
created the assembly line certainly thinks that is better. And we're on this assembly line life. And it is hard to step back from the optimizing everything in a way that we feel
Mhm.
like this is what optimal is. So hearing words like better is just really fascinating. And I think it's very
Mhm.
culturally specific too. I think of other places in the world and other times of the world, if they were to hear us describe like the ideal situation of like somebody that's working like the 40-hour work week, keeping the capitalism world that wheels turning, they would be like, why would you want that? How is that better? How
Yeah.
is, yeah, you're working more hours, you're pushing yourself, you're asking more of your body and your mind than you have ever before. Very little value on being still and being rather than doing. There's a high value on production.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, Let me ask you this. I alluded to it earlier. When I talked about impact and intent. People mean well, but they don't always know how their words or actions land or how they are harmful. So, what are some real tangible examples of things that, especially in our faith communities, we should be saying or doing that would be just an easy thing. And this, no shame on anybody. When we know better,
Yeah.
we do better. And we're never going to know everything. And so part of this journey is like, what have I missed so that I can hopefully be 1% better and then another percent
Yeah.
better.
Yeah,
What are some common
absolutely.
things?
So I've mentioned before infantilization, and we
Mhm.
don't even know that we're doing it. So just checking that in your own heart. What, how do if there's a person you want to get to know, or you have a friend that's disabled and you just haven't connected, but you want to try, ask yourself how you see them, and then ask yourself why
Mhm.
and what has informed that. Yeah, so infantilization is huge. Like if we say it's something, believe us,
Mhm.
believe that we know what we're talking about. Another thing is, I think I've mentioned as well, focusing on the disability and healing the disability. Um, there are many people in the disability demographic who don't want to be healed. And for some, it's actually an insult to even mention that. And even besides that, when you talk to someone about their disability, you're asking for their private medical information.
Yeah.
It's like walking up to a married person and saying, "Hey, I see your ring. I noticed that you're married. Tell me about your sex life." That's how intimate it can be for some
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And people just don't recognize that. People, and in my experience, Christians especially, think that if they can see it, they're entitled to ask,
Yeah.
and you're not.
That's a good
So,
point. Because I think some people are like, am I ignoring the elephant in the room by not mentioning the thing and not asking? Like, I've known my friend now for, a year,
mhm,
and I never once asked about, her prosthetic or like,
mm,
is it, what is being a good friend in that situation?
I'd say the elephant in the room is only awkward if you've never seen an elephant before.
Oh,
Um,
that's a good word.
and if someone's comfortable with you, we'll talk about it. It's never just the disability that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
It's society as well. And so if we feel comfortable enough with you, if you've done that work of building the relationship and knowing what context the person feels most comfortable in. For me, I have extreme sensory sensitivity. So asking me a question on a Sunday morning or out at the park or whatever, like having that kind of conversation with me is only going to hurt me.
Mhm.
But coming into my home and getting into that context where I feel most able to function, um, that's a great start. And then, yeah, just laying that foundation of friendship and trust, because it is a vulnerable thing to
Mm.
talk about our disability, and we never quite know how people are going to react. And when we start talking about our disability, it might be new information to you, the listener. It's not new information for us. What
Yeah.
often happens to me is people ask me about my disability. And before I felt obligated, I felt like I had to tell people. It took a very long time for me to realize, like, oh, they're not entitled to the information. But I would tell them, and then I would spend the rest of the conversation comforting them,
Oh,
because they're grieving about my situation, and I'm like, no, it's okay. Like, or people will then start to give me advice,
oh,
and then I have to navigate that. And the most audaciously arrogant thing you can do to a disabled person is to tell us what to do with our life. And when we say, no, actually, this is the truth, and you come back and say, no, 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 like correcting us about our own lives, even after we've told you,
oh,
like, no, this is
yeah,
this is what God has told me. I don't know what he's telling you about me, but
yeah,
God is telling me that this is this is where the boundary lines lie, in beautiful places in Psalm 16 for me in my life. He's
yeah,
doing a thing with me, and this is what it looks like. And it may not look good to you, but it's good to me and it's good to God.
yeah.
Um,
And the have you
so
tried XYZ is a message that says maybe you didn't do the right thing, or
mhm,
maybe you didn't do it right.
or you didn't do enough.
Yeah, like there is a real big assumption that's being made there. And I wonder if people just they feel uncomfortable and they want to resolve that
Mhm,
dissonance and
mhm.
they want you to give them permission.
Yeah,
And man,
yeah,
I bet it's a hard thing as a woman
yeah.
to not do the comfort, not to like let people off the hook all the time. Not that you want to be a jerk to people that really are kind and like just said something stupid and they shouldn't have. But sometimes people don't need to be let off the hook. Sometimes they just need to feel a little awkwardness. We're like,
Yes,
yeah, like
we,
don't say that.
yeah, in our society, we are probably the most comfortable society known to man,
Mhm,
and we are dependent on that comfort.
mhm.
And so we don't do well when there's a situation that seems unresolved to us or
Yeah.
that seems uncomfortable. And even though people don't mean to be selfish, a lot of it is selfishness. You're uncomfortable, and so you're trying to solve the problem, but you don't see that it's not a problem for me.
Yeah. What's
I'm
interesting,
not the problem.
did you read the post on Instagram from KJ Ramsey about going to, was she at somebody's house and somebody was ranting and raving about something about COVID precautions, different
Oh,
things, and all of a sudden realized that she was dealing with some really big long COVID issues that had come up from her already having a lot of health issues beforehand. And then this person wanted to pray for her.
yeah.
And she said, no. What a brave, right answer in that situation. Uh, People want to pray, but they don't want to make sure there's a ramp to the stage.
Right.
It's like
Right.
the get out of jail card. It's the get out of doing something else card sometimes. Like,
Yes.
I'll pray,
Yes.
and but I would say, or maybe you would argue, I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Prayer is a big deal. Um, Dr. Amy Kenny wrote, entitled her book, My Body is Not a Prayer Request,
What a
for
great
a
title.
reason.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal in the disability demographic. And often people say, why would you ever refuse prayer? And I'll tell you, I will refuse prayer because when someone prays for a disabled person, there's immediately a power dynamic. There's immediately, from even from a non-disabled person to a disabled person, a neurotypical person to a neurodivergent person, there's already a power dynamic.
Mhm.
And you add that non-disabled person praying for the disabled person, there's an additional power dynamic, because that person is talking to God. And for me to refuse that is a social no-no.
Yeah.
um, but people can use harmful, even abusive language in prayer
Yeah.
and call it good. And no, it is not good.
You had mentioned one of the big things that happens is that treating people that have disabilities, like infantizing them, is that the word?
Infantilizing, yeah.
Infantilizing them. Um, but you also mentioned earlier about, grab their hand or whatever. Like, tell me about how to respect somebody's boundaries. Like if somebody's a hugger,
Yeah.
just like you would with anybody else. This is my thinking. Tell me if I'm right on this or not. Like I normally wouldn't just go hug a random person, but if I'm a hugger, I would first say, "Hey, I'm a hugger. Do you mind if I give you a hug?"
Hmm.
Works the same way with somebody that might be sitting in a wheelchair
Hmm.
or some other.
Hmm. As long as you actually wait for us to answer.
Yeah, say yeah. So don't just grab the person.
Absolutely.
Ask permission
Absolutely.
because you said grab our hand, but like say, "Hey, can I?" You
That's
know,
assuming people like
have a
respect
friendship.
consent.
Yes, yes. And I think there's
That
like
was an
that's a good
assumption I made.
context. That's a good context to put it in, though, to say that like, is the rest of you being that, earned that sort of like friendship with the person? Would you have just grabbed anybody's hand? And maybe you shouldn't, just a stranger's, because you
Yeah.
don't know where they're at. But
Yeah.
like when you get to a point where you're just like, hey, I'm more of a like physical person. Do you mind if I just like
Yeah.
give you a squeeze? And then that person can say yes or no. Does that feel right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because you never know. I have a autoimmune condition that affects my skin, and
Mhm.
I can get hives like that.
Okay.
My entire skin can feel like I have a sunburn in a second, and
Mhm.
somebody comes up and hugs me. That's so much pain, not to mention, the fibromyalgia pain
Yeah.
and the other conditions pain. And then my sensory input, like a hug can
Yeah.
cause me to have a sensory meltdown. in a second.
Yeah. And if my point is to show Jennifer that I care about her, I don't want to cause a sensory meltdown. So if I know then that that hug does not communicate love and in friendship, we figure out another way to do that. Because
Yeah.
me being mad says that it's just about me. You're just wanting to,
Yeah.
that
If you're
doesn't seem like
thinking
a
about
friendship.
what's that?
It doesn't seem like respect and friendship,
No.
it seems like wanting myself to feel comfortable.
What are the love languages? Like it's cool to like we want to express what our love languages are, but how do you receive love first?
Yeah.
And let me like respect that first before I, force upon you how I show love.
Yeah.
And this is something back to the prayer, but also works here as well. That more than anything, like before prayer, before really any kind of service, and this is the thing, um, when I started asking for accessibility, when I started to talk about ableism, the number one response I got was, "But we have done. Nobody has received more care than you. Nobody has received more service from you." And we could how many ways that statement is so wrong, but it communicated that um, because they did service, I should be fine. I should be grateful. But we need to move past service. We need to move past service into friendship that
Mhm.
does justice. Disabled people don't need and can often like hurt more when like here's an act of service. A bunch of people came and helped you, and then for the
Mhm.
next year I'm on my own again. I get withdrawals from that.
Yeah.
That's actually more painful than if people didn't come at all. But that's typically how we think we rally for disabled people instead of actually entering into people's lives and become friends, so much so that you see the need for justice and
Yeah.
you do justice. Because the interesting thing about the disability demographic is not only are we the most inclusive because we affect every demographic possible,
Yes.
and you can be a part of our demographic at any point in your life, but we are also the demographic that is the most hindered from doing our own justice. Sometimes we can't even get to the table. There's no way we can even get in the room, let alone to the table, in order to do justice. And so we need those conduits. We need those liaisons. We need people who know our lives so well
Mhm.
that they can do justice on our behalf without it being saviorism.
Mhm. Oh, that's good. Without it being saviorism. That's a good line. And I think you have to be in relationship with people to know if it is. And I
Mhm.
think I would suggest if you use the word loving on, you're doing the wrong thing.
You're doing the wrong thing. Yeah.
I want to
No,
have
thank
a
you.
community.
Yeah. Yes. It's just,
Yeah.
I've become a charity project so quickly. And not the charity is bad, but the way when it's done in saviorism,
Yeah.
I would go as far as to say that is abusive.
Yeah.
It's oppressive
It's a
and it's
strong word, but I think
abusive.
it's important.
Yeah.
I think it fits. Um, what are there resources out there that people could like find and learn from, people, books, websites? Where would you point people to that are like, okay, I want to learn some things.
Right.
I want to be a good friend to my brothers and sisters in Christ and people that don't know Jesus, because I want them to be able to know Jesus and I don't want to make any barriers be in the way. What are some good resources out there?
Yes. Okay. So there's a lot of resources,
What are your favorites?
and I'll give you my favorites, and I will also um, there are a lot of resources by parents of children with disabilities. There's one, Disability in the Gospel, by Michael S. Beats, that I'm in the middle of, but so far, like, I have no issues with it. But there are a lot of books out there by non-disabled people where there's so much nuance lost that it's
Mhm.
like, there's some helpful things in here, but also there's also like some not great things in here.
Right, right.
So we need to be cognizant of the resources. So I am very I only have like few resources that I give that I feel comfortable giving.
Sure.
Um, so Joni and Friends, if you don't know Joni and Friends Ministry, get acquainted. Johnny Erickson Todd is she's just paved the way for so many of us.
Yes.
And their ministry is huge. It has so many arms. I'm currently in their institute taking a course on a theology of disability.
That's so great.
And they have a ministry that they partner for free with churches to become not accessible, inclusive.
Hmm.
Difference. You want to be inclusive, you want to be accepting, not simply accessible. That's what the
Hmm.
world does.
Yeah.
We, as Christ followers, we want to be inclusive of all people. So Joni and Friends is great. They have abundant resources. Disability in the Gospel by Michael S. Dietz. He does an amazing job getting into the Old Testament scriptures. The Old Testament is a very scary place for a disabled person to be reading. And he
Yeah.
does a wonderful job breaking it down. There's a children's book called Like Me by Laura Whiffler. And that is amazing. I did a sensitivity read for that book. I was so honored to do. Um, and Joni and Friends also has there's a book series. God Made Me Unique, I
Okay.
think. That's another one. And then I would highly recommend watching Crip Camp on Netflix. It takes you through the disability rights movement.
Mm.
And the late Judy Heumann, she just recently passed. I'm getting tears just thinking about it. All the work that these people did just to get ramps, and that's the bare minimum.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also, I think by the time this will air, my website will have launched. Um, I do sensitivity reads. I teach a theology of disability. I can do ministry consults, things like that. I will have available, and I'll launch it in August, and I'll be building resources as I go. And then a resource I have that would be if you have people that are disabled in your congregation or whatever, and they're just grieving. I wrote a Lamenter's Pathway to Joy, which walks through the Psalms of Lament to teach us how to lament and gives space or journal space to lament. So those are a few resources.
That's so great. I'm looking forward to pointing people to your brand new launch website. And I am excited for you, Jennifer, as you are dipping your toes into doing more publicly, using your words and your voice in a way that is really beautiful. And I'm really, really very much looking forward to it. What are you super passionate about right now? What is firing you up right now?
What is firing me up right now is as I'm working on my website, I am fired up about helping Christians see, understand, and identify Christian ableism.
Mhm.
I want Christians to understand that our Christian culture that we have created is based on ableism. The modern church has ableism built into its cornerstone. Our theology is built upon non-disabled interpretations of scripture.
Mhm.
There are passages in scripture that I read commentaries sometimes and I'm like, whoa, like this is so obvious to me, but to the scholar
Yeah.
has no idea. So that's what I'm passionate about right now. I'm gobbling up whatever hermeneutics and theology and doxology and doctrine I can, and uh, trying to look at it from the lens of an autistic and disabled
Yeah.
woman and see that while there are so many people who are so much more highly educated than I, who has had the privilege of that education. I'm a 3-time college dropout. I tried my hardest, but college just wasn't built for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Yet, despite having no letters behind my name, God has given me a discernment and He has given me a perspective that He finds important. And I may not have a glittering, expensive, hard fought education, but it's been hard fought in its own way.
Yeah.
I have had the fellowship with Christ, and to borrow my friend's term, God has been my special interest.
Yeah.
Uh, Scripture and the original languages, I've been in it, I've been studying, uh, and I'm excited to get out there and help Christians see what they haven't been able to see for so long.
I'm excited for you. I am so grateful for your time. And thank you for reaching out to me. Thank you for working with my crazy schedule. I know my listeners will get will get a lot out of this and have some things to talk about and some like real action things to move forward with, which makes me really excited. We're going to make the world less terrible.
Yes,
That's what we're going to do. One step at a time. We're going to make the world less terrible and
less terrible. Maybe even shoot for
good.
good.
Good. Okay.
Let's
I could
shoot
do
for
that.
good and
I
then
could
if we
shoot for
fall on
that.
less terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's shoot for good.